Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of A Chat in the Square. Today, I'm here with Elisa Marra, Research Fellow of theSquare, and we are going to talk about the ongoing political crisis in Tunisia. Thank you, Elisa, for being here.
Thank you, Jacopo. Thank you to theSquare.
Well, I want to start with a bit summing up what happened in the last month, doing a little recap, a bit as a question. But on July 25th, the President of Republic, Kais Saied, dismissed the Tunisian government and has frozen the parliamentary activities. The Minister of Justice and Defense were arrested, and they were also followed by the Speaker of the Tunisian Parliament, which was belonging to the Islamist Ennahda party. And then the president also granted to himself a stronger and political power and immunity. Let's say in October, there was appointed a new government with Najila Bouden, the first woman to be prime minister in the Arab world. But despite this, let's say, choice, the government is facing harsh critics, and the economic condition still remain disastrous in the country. So after this brief summary, I would love to ask you if we can assess or identify which are the main causes that brought to this political huge crisis in Tunisia. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. As you said, so Kais Saied decided to dismiss the government and also freeze the parliamentary activities. But a couple of weeks ago, he also decided to dissolve the Supreme Judicial Council. This is the body that in the country deals with judicial independence. And it is important because it was one of the last few structures that remained out of his control. He dissolved it, and then he decided to choose the new members. So this is something very important as well. And as you asked me about the causes, there are several causes. I think that to understand the political condition of the country, it is necessary to take a step back and see what are the social and the economic factors that shape today's Tunisia. And it is not only important to understand the politics, but also to understand what was defined as an unconstitutional power grab by critics, by international press, and what is a coup, and why it is supported by a large part of the population. So economically speaking, the country entered a harsh economic crisis right after the end of the revolution 10 years ago. So what happened is that this crisis has been described as the most violent financial meltdown that the country has faced ever since independence. So the policies that actually led to the crisis actually date back to the 70s, because the country in the 70s, under the support and the push of international institutions such as the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, started a series of privatization, deregulation policies, and also liberalization. And today, so these policies had bitter consequences on the economy. And what we see today is skyrocketing level of inflation that led to the increase in the price of consumer goods, deepen the gap between the rich and the poor. So, and also there's a higher number of families that today live under the poverty line. So this is definitely one of the big factors for social dissatisfaction. Talking about rich and poor, we see that the Tunisian elite pretty much established sort of an oligarchy in the country, because they don't want to see the birth of internal competitors. So what they do is try to inhibit the development of the national industry. That definitely weakens the economy of the country and has strong repercussions, socially and economically speaking, for the population. And so this is another very important factor, because it was there 10 years ago during the revolution. It's still there today. So we see this oligarchic establishment that has it's kind of a big deal in the country. Socially speaking, I would say that the most important factors that led to the political crisis are absolutely the unemployment rate, because according to statistics, in the third quarter of 2021, Tunisia had an unemployment rate that stood at 18% pretty much, and youth unemployment rates were touching 42.4%. But we have to say that these statistics are not actually updated because they lack a big part of the economy, which is the informal economy. So if we had the right data, it would be definitely worse than it already is. So this is a big one. And last, I'd say the factor of social inequality, territorial inequality, in terms of not only the difference between cities and peripheries.
Classical one.
Exactly, but these are super important because they were the epicenter of the revolution a decade ago. They still are important because it's where the protests sparked over the last 2 years, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have lights. But I would say more than that, regional differences. Because in Tunisia, the regions of the center and the south of the country are richer in terms of natural resources. But the population living in those areas do not have access to them, because these resources are usually redistributed to the north, to coastal areas, metropolitan areas. And so what happens is that the richest regions in terms of natural resources are also the most marginalized ones and the poorest ones.
Okay.
So the issue of territorial inequality is rather, connected to poor resource management and wealth distribution. So these are, I would say, the most important factors. We would be talking for hours, but
okay, no, I mean, we don't have all this time.
Exactly.
But
I would point this as the most important ones that led not only to the coup on the 25th, but especially to the fact that Saied still has kind of a big, there's a big part of the population supporting him. So the coup was defined by international press as something, it was shocking. Nobody was expecting that. In fact, it was pretty foreseeable.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's a very transversal, I would say, transversal turmoil that is shaking a bit Tunisia in its politics, economy, and society. I mean, the fact that there is, as you described it, a new oligarchic group or cartel, as we can say, it doesn't sound to me that is much different from Ben Ali periods. But so, I mean, I was thinking about it, and I was also thinking, international actors, I mean, used to see Tunisia a bit as the Tunisia exceptionalism after the Arab so-called Springs or rising after 2011, which started in Tunisia, by the way. So I was thinking, are we an end to this exceptionalism, and which are the effects and development in Tunisian society of all these, let's say, sum up of factors that you mentioned before?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the exception, the idea of exception that we had about Tunisia, absolutely. I would say that it was more the international press in terms of Western press that always described the country as an exception. If we think about Arab press, not so much. So it is true that over the last 10 years, right after the end of the revolution, Tunisia there's always been this leitmotif of the exceptionalism, this myth, because the country was always labeled as the only successful democratic sample that came out of the turmoil 10 years ago. The idea behind it was always the fact that Tunisia actually saw the fall of Ben Ali's despotic regime, and then the transition to a rather participatory democracy, because we have parties in the parliament, we have elections, free elections.
New constitution.
Exactly. The constitution is also praised internationally for being quite progressive. So this is true. But the framing of Tunisia as the exception always came out of comparison.
It's like a bit Arab Springs that I use also before.
Exactly.
It's like it's a bit of dogma. You use it, but it's not really.
Exactly. So
it's a very Western perspective.
Absolutely. So the countries that saw the Arab Spring, the Arab Spring were 5. Tunisia was one of them. So the others, 10 years later, they're still facing, war, state disintegration. I'm talking about Yemen, Libya, Syria. Then there was the case of Egypt. That was yet another case because we had, at first it seemed like it happened, the revolution succeeded. And then after just a couple of years, the then government led by Mohammed Morsi fell after the coup. And now we have Al-Sisi who, established yet another dictatorship in the country, because that's what it is. So Tunisia cannot be compared to them. Of course, it was a more positive example. But to define it as success, the term exceptionalism comes out of, it is connected with this idea of success. We tend always to label a country, dictatorship is bad, democracy means that it has to be good. Of course, democracy is better than dictatorship, but a democracy needs to be real, needs to be successful. And the country never saw an economic development, a tangible one. All the requests of the revolution were never met. So there was a big part of the revolution that were young people, and today they are the most neglected ones. We talk about unemployment rates among youth. We also spoke about this oligarchic establishment that we have. So what happened is that 10 years ago there was one big corrupt family, that was Ben Ali's corrupt family, that controlled pretty much everything. And then when the revolution happened and the regime fell, this elite basically morphed into a more scattered one. So what was one family 10 years ago is now a dozen of them, 10 of them, and the people know exactly who they are. So they are still protesting against them. And so I would say that I do not agree with the term exceptionalism in the first place. I would not say that we are at an end of an era, of the exceptionalism era, because
never started.
No. and it was pretty tangible when I was living there. I went there with the highest expectations because there was always this idea, of democracy. And then you go there and you're like, you don't really see it, this big change. And the people, especially, it also very much depends on the level in terms of social class of the people, but many of them were complaining. Of course, the poorest classes were, complaining about democracy, and they were, regretting the old times. That is not good either, of course. But
it's a normal,
It's pretty normal.
Yeah. Normal.
But it's the fact that a big part of the population was actually neglected, and they are poor. The economic crisis is the biggest problem.
I mean the revolution was the aim of the revolution was to improve their situation. It started with a street vendor, so but that people probably didn't see any change
No, there was this big hope, and of course it is a step. It is an important step, being able to at least establish a democracy, but it has to function. And this is what this is why Saied has got a kind of a big part of the population supporting him, because he when he speaks, he tends to be like the president that came to save the country from the collapse he has this a way of talking that, and also his political program, because what was the focal point of his political program was the fight to corruption. So that is also why he decided to do what he did. So he froze the parliament because he thinks that the parliament is the ultimate structure that is corrupted, because the parliament does not make the interest of the population, but it makes the interest of the party. And also the idea of
so he's the defender of the right of the people against a corrupted group or cartel or oligarch that is basically ruling the parliament and the institution.
What he wants is to eradicate the corruption, or at least on paper. And so also the Supreme Judicial Council was dissolved because he thinks that it is corrupted, because when it comes to issuing rulings related to terrorism issues or corruption issues, there's always a delay. So he thinks that there is like some kind of corruption behind it, briberies and so on. And so he dissolved it for that reason. When we think about him and when we see the coup, we think that he's a counter-revolutionary, because the revolution wanted democracy, and what he's doing now is slowly going back to authoritarianism,
resembling something else. Yeah.
Exactly, but in truth, he never spoke against the revolution. On the opposite, from the very first speech that he had, he always not only defended the revolution, but he said that the regime, the post-democratic transition failed, not the revolution itself. So what is the broken system is this corrupt system, nepotistic system that still is there in Tunisia, and he wants to fight it. And that is why not only strongly supported, but if you look at there are two factions protesting in the weekends. Usually they go to the streets and they protest. There's the part that is protesting against him and against the coup is the part that supports the Islamist party, and so especially Ennahda and El Karama. The ones that support him are the civil society, the people that took part to the revolution 10 years ago, and the youth. So it might look like a paradox, but if we think about the fact that these ones were the ones that were, mostly marginalized and, neglected after the uprisings 10 years ago, it might be easier to understand. Still is not easy, but a good thing would be to not always, apply Western bias to non-Western regimes. Yeah. So that's it.
But it's interesting that he's supported by those that trigger basically the revolution and contribute to make it comes through. And then where, as you said, neglected, and he's their representative, let's say. But this was inside Tunisia. But now my last question, it's about international community, because this new government, as you said, probably with Western bias, but was a bit so with concern, especially by European Union. So the actors, as I mentioned, European Union or the Gulf countries or the neighbors of Tunisia, how they are perceiving this political change and how they are acting or reacting to it.
Well, yes, the European Union and democratic institutions such as, the International Monetary Fund and so on did not react well. And I mean, they're right. They are slowly crawling back to authoritarianism. Yes, that was the reaction. I think that they should be more involved. I'm talking about, for instance, not only the European Union, but also internal states. I think about Italy, for instance, because they will, what's going on in the country will definitely have repercussions, especially in terms of migratory flows. And the first country that Tunisians, of course, the first country that they get to is Italy, and so they should definitely be more involved rather than just speak against speak against it. But I would say so. Geopolitically speaking, Tunisia is not that. It doesn't have very much of a significance in terms of geopolicy because it is kind of a small state. But it is important at the moment, specifically for its geographical position and especially for its proximity to Libya. So geographically speaking, first of all, Tunisia contributes to the instability of North Africa, which is already
quite unstable. Yeah,
exactly. And being close to Libya, it might be important for some actors. So what we see is the typical fight between the Saudi Arabia, Emirati, and Egyptian axis on one side versus Qatar and Turkey on the other. That's
so maybe it's like a kind of spillover from
exactly.
Libya.
Absolutely. So what happens is that basically Said's gambit was cheered by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, because especially for his opposition to the Ennahda party. So Ennahda is the Islamist party, and it is, of course, related to Turkey and Qatar. So the actions of the party are dictated by Ankara and mostly sponsored by Qatar. And what Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Emirates want to do is to limit, especially Turkey's sphere of influence in the country and in the Mediterranean in general. So having Said, do a coup, was important to them because it means that it stopped Ennahda from getting the power. Even though I honestly don't think that Ennahda is, it's starting to lose support in the country. But still, this is the main reason behind, because having Ennahda at the power means paving the way for Turkey's interest in the region. So these, I would say, are the most important ones. I think that Said might actually take advantage of this and try to get monetary support from oil-rich Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, especially because he will not be supported by democratic institutions such as the World Bank or International.
World Bank said at all that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so he needs money.
Yeah.
And he might be going there to look for it. So yes, also another country which might be more involved because they might want to stop Turkey's ascent in the Mediterranean is France. So we definitely need to keep an eye on them. But I would say that this axis, this fight between especially Middle Eastern countries, they were the ones that were more involved in what happened in Tunisia and what is going on. He said this summer that it was going to be temporary, but we don't see an end to it. So,
and since just because you mentioned a possible unilateral interest or by France, and you mentioned also that Italy, it's probably, as the South migration routes, it's going to Italy. Italy unilaterally didn't give any sign of being interested or giving attention.
There were talks.
Okay.
There were talks. They also, Italy and France, among the countries of the European Union, are the ones that have also, bilateral treaties with Tunisia. I would say the most important ones.
Oh.
So I think that in the future they might be more involved. So yeah.
Okay. Well, it is. It's interesting to see how regional or Mediterranean regional geopolitics is also affecting, as in other countries, also Tunisia. But maybe, Turkey and United Arab Emirates now are speaking again, or some communication channel, it's open at least. So maybe it will have also repercussion in Tunisia and in all the area, but let's see how.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I don't see it going well, honestly, for the country. There is this trend that we're going back to authoritarianism. So yeah, it is sad. It is sad because I think that even with all the flaws that the country might have, it was actually the only one that, succeeded in at least implementing a democracy.
Yeah.
So going back is sad, but
yeah,
we will see what happens.
Well, we will see, and maybe we will have another chat on it to speak about the future, hopefully positive developments in Tunisia. But well, thank you, Elisa, for your really wide and deep description of all the situation and political crisis in Tunisia. And this was Chat in the Square, and see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.